Good morning, my dear students. This is Dr. Vijisha, Professor and Head of Department of Anatomy. So today we'll be seeing on a very interesting topic of embryology, which is the development of pharyngeal arches. It is quite an important topic because it takes its place in every question paper. Okay. So to start with, in continuation with the previous topics of embryology. Yeah. So after the folding has happened, yeah. So due to the head fold, a portion of endoderm lined cavity is absorbed into the head fold. You can see it in the diagram. See here, this is before folding of the head end. This is the head end of the entire of the embryonic disc. Okay. So where the head end has folded. It is a process, we call it as folding of embryo, which we have already discussed in the previous slide. Yes. So at the head end, there occurs an event called folding of head end of embryo, whereby as a result of this process, the endoderm lined cavity will be enclosed into the head fold. Okay. So that endoderm lined cavity is here represented as yellow color line. Okay. So here it was a straight line as a result of head end fold. This yellow line, which you call it as the endodermal germ layer, has absorbed itself into forming something, a tubular structure. You call it as a foregut. Okay. It lies between the developing brain dorsally and pericardial cavity ventrally. So this is this blue colored shaded area is the area of your developing brain. Okay, which occupies a dorsal position of the primitive or the foregut, primitive gut or the foregut. Okay, whereas ventrally you have the pericardial cavity occupying the position. See, there is a major difference between this diagram and this diagram. Here, the events or it is the layout of the structures before the folding of the embryo. Okay, here in this picture, all the structures are rearranged as a result of folding of head end of embryo. The cranial end of the foregut is closed by buccopharyngeal membrane. Yes, buccopharyngeal membrane is a membrane which is a precursor of your oral cavity. So in fact, this buccopharyngeal membrane later during the development of the embryo gets disintegrated. Hence, your oral cavity or the connection between the external environment and the developing embryo is established. Okay. This later ruptures to form the oral cavity opening. Okay. So at this stage, the head of the embryo is represented by a bulge caused by developing brain vesicles. So this is how, after the head end and tail end folding, this is how the embryo is represented. You will have some bulges here and there. Okay. So the cranial end bulge is the bulge produced by developing brain. Okay. Whereas ventrally, you will have a bulge. Right now at this stage, this embryo represents the pericardial cavity bulge over here. Okay, so in between the developing brain bulge and the pericardial bulge, you have a small layer, which you call it, which is closed by a membrane. You call it as buccopharyngeal membrane, which is nothing but your future oral cavity. So right now you are going to call it as a stomatodium. Okay. The pericardial cavity lies in the future thoracic region. Stomatodium is in between the head and heart. Yes, I have already explained the diagram, how the embryo looks, appears, presents itself at this stage. As such, there is no neck of the embryo. Yes, it is quite interesting to know that the embryo, which is in the developing process of a human body, you have a head, you have a pericardial bulge, which is going to represent as a heart, okay, where your heart is going to develop. But in between, an important structure is missing. What is that? The neck. There is no neck in the embryo at that particular point. The most typical feature in development of head and neck is pharyngeal or brachial arch formation. So what happens? Now the neck has to develop. See, ultimately we all have a neck, yes? So it is not just the neck which is going to be extended. There are several structures arising from there, okay? What happened initially? Arches appear in the 4th and 5th week and contributes to the external appearance of embryo. So as the embryo is developing, during the 4th and 5th week, what happens? At the place where the neck has to be formed, between the brain bulge and the pericardial bulge, just beneath your stomatodeum, what happens? There will be a series of arches. See here in this diagram, you can see so many arches developing at the future neck region, that is between the head end and the pericardial end. Okay, so you have several arches developing. So these arches are only called as pharyngeal arches. Why? Because it is at the site of the pharynx, future pharynx, that these arches are developing. Hence, you're going to call it as pharyngeal arches. And when does this occur? This occurs between the 4th and 5th week of developing embryo. This is one more picture where the head end of the embryo is magnified or zoomed. So this is your developing brain and this is your pericardial bulge. Okay, and here you have your stomatodeum. Okay, between that you have the arches developing when between the 4th and 5th week of embryo. The mesoderm in the wall of the foregut, which represents the future pharynx, shows rod-like thickenings. Okay, so from which layer? You have 3 germ layers, yes? Ectoderm, endoderm, and mesoderm. Okay, so after the head and fold, I have told you the endoderm gets absorbed inside the embryo and it forms a foregut. So this foregut belongs to the endoderm. Beyond the foregut, you have a mesodermal layer. What happens at this site of your future pharynx? These mesoderm will start thickening in the form of rod. Okay, that is why it is mentioned here as shows rod-like thickenings. Okay, so the mesoderm in the wall of the foregut, where the foregut is going to has already formed, and at its wall, whatever mesoderm is there, it will start getting thickening in the form of rods. Okay, so this is your ectoderm layer. This is your endoderm layer where your foregut is going to be formed. Okay, and between the ectoderm and endoderm, you have the mesoderm. This mesoderm, what happens? This mesoderm is going to get thickened in the form of rod. Okay, this is a section, that is why it is seen as circle, but actually it is a rod-like oblique thickenings occurring all around the future pharynx. The pharyngeal arch consists of a core of mesenchymal tissue covered outside by ectoderm and inside by the endoderm. Yes, that's what I just explained. You are going to have rod-like thickenings of mesoderm, which is covered inside by endoderm and outside by ectoderm. Okay. Something about the mesoderm here. Mesoderm is derived from paraxial and lateral plate mesoderm. Okay. So the paraxial and lateral plate mesoderm will give you the musculature of head and neck. Okay, so musculature of head and neck are derived from your paraxial and lateral plate mesoderm. Whereas the skeletal components of the face are derived from the neural crest cells, which migrates into the arches. So you have 2 things. One is the musculature of head and neck. The other one are the skeletal components of the face. Okay, so the musculature of head and neck is derived from your paraxial and lateral plate mesoderm. These are the categories of mesoderm. Yes. Then you have the neural crest cells, which is formed during the neural crest formation or the notochord formation. These neural crest cells will in turn give rise to so many structures. One of them, they very fastly migrate into the arches and give rise to the skeletal components of the face. So this is another picture which will give you a better idea. This is the developing brain. This is the pericardial bulge, and here are your pharyngeal rod thickenings. The first pair appears as a surface elevations lateral to the developing pharynx. Soon, other arches appear as obliquely disposed, rounded ridges on each side of the future head and neck region. Okay, so the rod-like thickenings are placed in an oblique manner on either side of the foregut where the pharynx is going to be formed. Okay, so as the first arches has appeared, immediately the other series of arches will start developing near the head and neck region. This is how it is. See here, one arch to a second arch, third arch, fourth arch, fifth arch, sixth arch. Series of arches will start developing in your future head region. Okay, this embryo, if it is cut in a coronal section, you get this diagram. Here it is very nicely displaced. See here, this is ectoderm. Okay, this green line represents ectoderm. The blue one is your foregut, which is made up of or formed by endoderm. In between, you will have the mesenchymal condensation in the form of rod-like thickenings. Hence, you are getting so many arches. Okay. So there is something called as pharyngeal apparatus. Okay, it is a group of things together. So many components you have. First one is your pharyngeal arch. Okay. Then you have something called as pharyngeal pouches. Then you have pharyngeal grooves or clefts. Then you have a pharyngeal membrane. So pharyngeal arches, you already know, these are the mesodermal thickenings, okay, which is obliquely placed in the form of rod, okay, which is lined externally by ectoderm and entered internally by endoderm. You have pharyngeal pouches. Pharyngeal pouches is completely made up of the endoderm. See, look at this picture. This is one pharyngeal arch. Okay, this is one pharyngeal arch. The endodermal layer, you trace it. Okay, at the junction of one and the second arch, you have a pouch formed by the endodermal layer. So this you're going to call it as endodermal pouch. Okay. Externally, something happens. The ectodermal germ layer in between the arches gets a dip. Okay, a dip. So that is a little sharp compared to the pouch. So you call it as ectodermal clefts or pharyngeal groove. Okay. So between the arches, you have membrane. You call it as pharyngeal membrane. Okay. Each rod. Okay. So each rod will start from lateral wall of the gut and proceed dorsoventrally to fuse the opposite side. Yes. So it's not like only on the ventral aspect or on the dorsal aspect that the rods are displayed, okay, or the pharyngeal arches are displayed. Any mesodermal thickening, initially it will start from either side of the throat, okay. Then it is fused dorsoventrally, dorsally and ventrally. This rod-like thickening is going to fuse with each other. So it completely forms an entire thickening, okay, entire arch. 6 such rods are formed, which you are going to call it as pharyngeal or branchial arches. Okay? So I told you several rods of thickenings are going to arise in the region of neck, but you only have 6 rods of thickening. So you have 6 pharyngeal arches formed. Okay, so this is the first one, second, third, fourth and the fifth one. There are some few confusion or few changes happening here, which I'll let you know. The fifth arch disappears soon after its formation. This was the thing which I mentioned. Okay, you have 6 arches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What happened to the fifth one? It will just appear and immediately it will disappear. Okay, but you need to write it as you have 6 arches appeared initially. Subsequently, this fifth arch will disappear. So finally, only the 5 arches remain. Okay, so these are the 5 arches. See, this is a coronal section where this shows the floor of the foregut. Okay, primitive gut. This is the floor. These are the elevations or eminence where your future tongue is going to develop. So it is this picture. Okay, on either side, you have the cross section or the sections of the pharyngeal arch. At the center, you have the floor of the mouth. Okay, foregut. Fine. So first arch, second arch, third arch, fourth arch, and then the 6th arch. What happened to the 5th one? Read here, the fifth arch disappears soon after its formation. Okay, so this was the diagram which I was mentioning. It's the same picture there. This is the endoderm. Okay, these are the pharyngeal arches, and these are the ectoderm. Ectoderm gets dipped in between the arches. Hence, you are going to call it as ectodermal cleft. See here, subsequently what happens, these ectodermal cleft will modify it and then give rise to some structure, or ultimately it is going to form something. Here, you can see how much changes it is undergoing. Meanwhile, what happens to the endodermal pouches? See here, the endodermal layer, you just have a close observation of it. Endodermal pouches is in fact imaginating or invading inside and then forming several other important structures, which I will be mentioning in the subsequent slides. Okay. The contents of mesoderm of arch. So this pharyngeal arch, what is it? It is a condensation of a mesoderm. Yes, lined externally by ectoderm and internally by endoderm. Yes. But these condensation of mesoderm, which together you call it as a pharyngeal arch, a single pharyngeal arch, in turn gives rise to several structures. Okay, it gives rise to a skeletal element. It gives rise to a muscle, a striated muscle. It gives rise to a nerve. It gives rise to an artery. So all these elements, okay, are interconnected with each other. So for example, if a nerve is coming from the first arch, that nerve is in fact going to supply the muscle which is derived from the same arch. Okay, and the skeletal element will be closely associated with the structures developing from the same arch. Okay, they are all belonging to single family, right? And the artery is also will be closely associated with that. In turn, it will be supplying the structure. So you consider the elements derived out of individual arches will become a family. Okay. See here, these are the individual arches which is having or which belongs to which withholds the individual nerve supply. Okay, so it will own individual nerves. Each arch will own individual nerves. Yes, if you are X, then you belong to first pharyngeal arch. Okay, and this nerve is going to somehow contribute to the structures deriving from it. Each arch has its own artery that pass through the arch, connecting the ventral aorta and the dorsal aorta. See here, this is the pharyngeal arch region which we are discussing. Okay, so this is the cranial end of the embryo. Okay, you can see the aorta over here, dorsal aorta. Everything is in the process of developing and forming. Okay. So meanwhile, what happens? Each arch will have its own artery. Yes, I have already mentioned each pharyngeal arch will have its own artery, which is connected ventrally with the developing pericardium, okay, or the heart, pericardial area or the heart, and dorsally with the dorsal aorta. So see here, that is how these are connected with each other, ventrally with the developing heart and dorsally with the dorsal aorta. Most of them will obliterate, few of them will pertain. Okay, so some persist and some disappear after development. Okay, so this picture will give you every information about the pharyngeal arches in a nutshell. These pictures depicted with different colors will give you the derivation of each pharyngeal arch. Okay, see here, the structures displayed here are the structures derived from the pharyngeal arch. Okay, so you have here malleus, incus, stapes. Then you have sphenomandibular ligament. Yes. Then you have the remnants of Meckel's cartilage of mandible. If you see the malleus and incus and sphenomandibular ligament and the remnants of Meckel's cartilage within the mandible, all are given red color. Okay, it is because all these structures which I just mentioned, colored with red, are all derivatives of first pharyngeal arches. Okay, likewise, The green denotes the structures derived from the second pharyngeal arch. What are the structures? You have stapes, you have styloid process, you have stylohyoid ligament, then you have the smaller horn of hyoid bone, you have the upper half of the body of hyoid bone. Okay, so bilaterally on both the sides, these structures are derived from the respective arches. Okay, so the greater corner, lower half of the hyoid bone are all derived from the third pharyngeal arch. Okay, and from the fourth and sixth arches, you have the thyroid and cricoid cartilages. So this is in a simple nutshell. This picture will give you the major derivatives of the 6 pharyngeal arches. So we'll go individually. Each arch contributes one. The first pair of pharyngeal arches plays a major role in facial development. Yes, the cartilage of first pharyngeal arch, you call it as Meckel's cartilage. So it is the first pharyngeal arch which forms a major, which plays a major role in the formation of the face, in the development of the facial hair. Yes. So you have skeletal components, you have malleus, incus, and the cartilaginous component as Meckel's cartilage. See here you have a detailed view where you have malleus, incus, the anterior ligament of malleus, the sphenomandibular ligament, and the remnants of the Meckel's cartilage. All these are derived from the first pharyngeal arch. The portion between the middle ear and mandible will be represented by 2 ligaments. One is anterior ligament of malleus and sphenomandibular ligament. These 2 ligaments are derived from the pharyngeal arch. In the previous picture, this is the anterior ligament of malleus, and this is the sphenomandibular ligament connecting the middle ear. Okay, middle ear with the mandible. So 2 ligaments, all the 2 are derived from your ligaments also derived from your first pharyngeal arch. Then you have, these are the skeletal elements. Now you have the muscles derived from the first pharyngeal arch. You have muscles of mastication. You have lateral pterygoid, medial pterygoid, masseter, temporalis, all derived from the first pharyngeal arch. Then you have mylohyoid muscle, anterior belly of digastric, tensa tympani and tensa veli palatal muscles. All these muscles, all these names you need to memorize it. Okay, when we ask you what are the muscles derived from first pharyngeal arches, you need to mention all these muscles. Okay. Each arch will have its own nerve, post-traumatic nerve, and a branch from adjacent arch, which you call it as pre-traumatic nerve. Okay. The post-traumatic nerve of first arch is mandibular nerve. So the first arch owns a nerve, yes, and that nerve is your mandibular nerve. Only in first arch you will have 2 nerves, which is post and pre-traumatic nerve. Post-traumatic nerve is the mandibular nerve, and the pre-traumatic nerve, which is contributing in formation of the first arch nerve criteria, you call it as chorda tympani branch of facial nerve. Okay, so all these cranial nerves owns one arch. The first arch is owned by the mandibular nerve. So all the muscles arising from this arch will be supplied by mandibular nerve or its branches. Okay, because they all belong to one family. Artery, maxillary artery is the artery of the first arch. You have few first arch syndromes associated with it. First arch syndromes are congenital defects caused by a failure of neural crest cells to migrate into the first pharyngeal arch. Yes, I have already mentioned the first pharyngeal arch contributes more for your development of the face. Yes, so when these neural crest cells fail to migrate and reach in the formation, in the joint, the contribution of development of the pharyngeal arch or the concerned structure, it results in a congenital defect. You have 2 congenital defects. One you call it as Treacher-Collins syndrome. The other one you call it as Pierre-Robin syndrome. So what do I mean by Treacher-Collins syndrome? Treacher-Collins syndrome or mandibulofacial dysostosis is the other name of the Treacher-Collins syndrome. Okay, the autosomal dominant congenital disorder. It is an autosomal dominant congenital disorder characterized by craniofacial deformities. Okay, it is found in about 1 in 50,000 births. So luckily, we might or may not see this anomaly at all. Okay, so it is found in 1 in 50,000 births. What are its features? These people who are suffering from this type of particular syndrome will have a downward slanting eyes. You will have a micrognathia. Micrognathia is nothing but a ill-formed lower jaw. Conductive hearing loss, underdeveloped zygoma, drooping part of the lateral lower eyelids, or malformed or absent. So totally they are going to look like this. Okay, see the micrognathia. Yes, ill-developed lower jaw. So this is how a Treacher-Collins syndrome patients will appear. The next syndrome associated with the first arch defects are Pierre-Robin syndrome. Pierre-Robin syndrome is a congenital condition of facial abnormalities in humans. Three main features are: you will have a cleft palate, retrognathia, and glossopresis. Okay, a genetic cause to Pierre-Robin syndrome was recently identified. Pierre-Robin sequence may be caused by genetic anomalies at chromosomes 2, 11, or 17. Okay, so this is for your information sake. Yes, so there are syndromes associated with the pharyngeal arch. There are two syndromes. You can still explore into the topic and see what it is individually, or what are the clinical features, how does it go hand in hand. Yes, I'm just mentioned this, you can take it as an assignment also. So this is the Pierre-Robin syndrome. So one of the feature I can show you here is the cleft palate. Yes. Second pharyngeal arch. Second pharyngeal arch is nothing but the Richard's cartilage. Okay, cartilage of the second arch, you call it as Richard's cartilage, whereas the first one is the Meckel's cartilage. Okay, the dorsal portion gives rise to, so you are going to have a Richard's cartilage. The dorsal portion of it will give rise to stapes, styloid process, smaller horn, and superior part of the hyoid bone. All these I have mentioned in the earlier slides where the picture was shown. Okay. The portion between the styloid process and hyoid bone is represented by stylohyoid ligament. So this is the stylohyoid ligament. This is the hyoid bone. This is the styloid process. Ligament connecting styloid process and the lesser corner of hyoid bone is nothing but the stylohyoid ligament. The muscles belonging to the second arch are muscles of facial expressions. You have plenty of muscles in the face: occipiter frontalis, platysma, stylohyoid, posterior belly of digastric, muscles of pinna, and stapedius. All these muscles are derived from the second arch. The nerve of the second arch is the facial nerve. Hence, all the muscles derived from this arch will be supplied by facial nerve. The artery is nothing but the stapedial artery. See here, styloid process. All the structures colored in green are derived from your second pharyngeal arch. You have stapes, styloid process, then you have a stylohyoid ligament, lesser cornu, and the upper half of the body of hyoid. Something about the third pharyngeal arch. Third pharyngeal arch, the cartilage component is the lower part of the body and greater horn of the hyoid bone. Yes, we have seen that picture. Yes, the muscle derived from this arch is the stylopharyngeus muscle. Glossopharyngeal nerve is the nerve which owns the arch. Okay, we'll take it in that way. Artery, the external, internal, and common carotid arteries. Right, so this is the yellow colored one. Is supplied by, is derived from the third pharyngeal arches. What about the fourth and sixth pharyngeal arches? The cartilaginous component of these last two arches are the cartilages of larynx. Muscles, all the muscles of pharynx and larynx are derived from this arch. Nerve, for the fourth arch, you have superior laryngeal nerve. Sixth arch, you have the recurrent laryngeal nerve. These two nerves are the branches of the vagus nerve. These are the derivatives of fourth and sixth arches. See here. Fourth and sixth cartilages. Now so far we have seen the derivatives of pharyngeal arches. First arch, second arch, third arch, and fourth and sixth arches. Okay. So we have finished the pharyngeal arch derivatives or the components of it. Okay. Now we move on to the derivatives of ectodermal clefts. Ectodermal clefts. These are the clefts formed by the ectoderm. Okay. These clefts now between the arches is going to give rise to few structures. What are they? Number one, the 5-week embryo characterized by 4 pharyngeal clefts. Fine. So this pharyngeal arch formation occurs between 4th and 5th week of the embryo. By the time the embryo is in the 5th week, you will get 4 pharyngeal clefts. Okay, so between the arches are formed. Between the arches, the ectodermal layer is going to dip between the arches, which you call it as ectodermal cleft. So out of these 4 pharyngeal clefts, only one contributes to the definitive structure of the embryo. Okay, so this is what we are talking about. This is an external, ectodermal cleft. This one, 1, 2, 3, 4, and all you have, but nothing is there. Why? It is very clearly said. Only one contributes to the definitive structure of the embryo. This is a ectodermal cleft which is contributing to form something big. What is that? The external auditory meatus. Okay, meanwhile, from the endodermal pouch, some structure is coming, invaginating in to form something. These two are meeting up. Okay, so right now we know from the ectodermal cleft, external auditory meatus is forming. Okay. The first cleft is between the first and the second arches. We will have 2 parts, the dorsal and ventral part. The first cleft, dorsal part, forms the external acoustic meatus. Okay. The epithelial lining at the bottom of meatus will form, the epithelial lining at the bottom of the meatus will contribute to the formation of the eardrum here. Okay, so something here is forming, which is nothing but the eardrum, which will have contribution externally from the ectoderm and internally from the endoderm. The mesoderm of first and second arches around it forms a pinna. Okay, so the mesoderm lying here is going to form the pinna, whereas the ventral part will get obliterated. So all the derivatives of first pharyngeal cleft are all derived from the dorsal part of that cleft, whereas the ventral part just gets obliterated. Now, the second cleft, you have the second, third, and fourth cleft. What happens to them? Okay, so first cleft, you know what is happening? It is forming the external auditory meatus. Fine. The second arch mesoderm, the green color one, will start growing faster. And what happens? Due to its immediate growth, it overhangs the third, fourth, and sixth arches. So you have third, fourth, fifth, and sixth arches. This, because of the mesodermal growth, this is going to overhang over the third, fourth, and sixth arch like this. Okay. It is going to overhang over the arches as well as the cleft present in between. Fine. So it ultimately fuses with the tissues caudal to the arches. This overhanging will prolong. It is going to cover the entire arches and the ectodermal cleft in between. And this prolongation is going to get fused with the other layer and completely seal off these bulges or the arches. Thereby, you get a very smooth external appearance. Okay. Initially, during its prolongation and fusion with the lower region, initially a narrow space lies between the second and the rest of the arches. Okay. Between the second and the rest of the arches, a narrow space is left out. This is called as a cervical sinus. What is a cervical sinus? A cavity lined by ectodermal epithelium between the clefts. So if you see something interesting about the cervical sinus, it is a cavity here, of course, which is lined inside and outside by the ectodermal layer. Okay. Soon it gets obliterated and smooth contour of the neck is achieved. Okay, so it gets obliterated and the smooth contour of the neck is achieved. See here, here. If it persists, it may produce cystic swellings along the anterior border of sternocleidomastoid muscle or in the tonsil. If the cervical sinus persists, if that gap is not sealed, okay, then you get something called as pharyngeal cyst. See here, you can see a bulge here. So typically it will be present along the anterior border of your sternocleidomastoid muscle. So any bulge at the sternocleidomastoid muscle, during evaluation, you should always have this embryological possibility also in mind. If it opens up onto the surface, it is called as brachial sinus. See here, brachial sinus. This is your sternocleidomastoid muscle, and here will be your anterior border of sternocleidomastoid muscle. So always keep an embryological aspect in your mind. Due to second pharyngeal arch fails to grow caudally over the third, fourth arches and leaving remnants of second, third, and fourth clefts in contact with the surface through a narrow canal, then you call it as a brachial fistula. Okay. It is found on the lateral side of neck, anterior to the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Abnormal canal opens internally into the tonsillar sinus and externally in the side of the neck. So when there is a fistula, it is communicating between two cavities. One is your tonsillar sinus, the other one is externally at the side of the neck. Okay, and usually it is found in the lateral side of the neck, anterior to the anterior border of sternocleidomastoid muscle. See here, this is the positions, common positions of brachial fistula or the cyst. This is the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Now the derivatives of endodermal pouches. It is quite easy and very interesting. Okay. Endodermal pouches, where are we going to see? These are the endoderm. Okay. So these endodermal layer will get dipped between the arches. Hence you call it as endodermal pouches. Okay. The embryo has 5 pairs of pharyngeal pouches. The last one is atypical and considered as a part of food. Pouches give rise to a number of important organs. Yes, you'll be wondering. See here, the first pouch and dorsal part of second pouch forms a tubotympanic recess. So you have these are the pouches. Okay, here only the pouches are represented. The first and the second pouch will form a tubotympanic recess. Okay, here. This forms a medullary cavity and auditory tube. So this tubotympanic recess will go on and become the medullary cavity and the auditory tube. The ventral part of the tube, the ventral part of the second pouch forms the palatine tonsil and tonsillar fossa. Here. Okay. The third pouch, dorsal part. So this is the third pouch. It is having a dorsal part and a ventral part. The dorsal part forms the inferior parathyroid glands, whereas the ventral part will give rise to the thymus gland. Okay. The thymus, after formation, descends down to the thorax, carrying it with the inferior parathyroid gland, because both are the kids of the same mother. So wherever they go, they need to travel together. During the descent of inferior parathyroid gland, it is separated and incorporated into the developed thyroid gland. So the inferior parathyroid gland will come together with the thymus. It gets stopped at the region of the thyroid gland because the location of parathyroid gland is over the posterior border of thyroid gland. Okay. The fourth pouch, dorsal part gives rise to superior parathyroid gland. Then the last pouch is the fifth pouch or ultimobrachial body. The fifth pouch is seen only for a brief period during the development. Elongated ventral part of the fourth pouch with fifth pouch forms ultimobrachial body. There is always a question on what is ultimobrachial body. Okay, so the fourth pouch with the fifth pouch together is called as the ultimobrachial body. The two together forms a complex. You call it as a caudal pharyngeal complex. It gives origin to the parafollicular cells or C cells of the thyroid gland. These cells secrete calcitonin, regulates calcium level in the blood. Okay. So this is the final product of the pharyngeal arches, ectodermal cleft, endodermal pouches. See, this is how these are the important structures of the head and neck region or the foregut region or the pharynx region. So many vital structures are derived from the pharyngeal arches. So it is very, very important for all of you to learn and know and understand and analyze about the pharyngeal arches. So in continuation with this, we will have several lectures, and as well do read about the pharyngeal arches, okay, which will give you the development of so many important structures in a nutshell. Okay, it will correlate with the various doubts in your mind. For example, why this muscle is here? Why is it supplied by a nerve which is coming from very far? It is all because of the embryological reasons. Okay, so from the place of development, they travel like nomads. So they go to the different places, and finally they will be supplied by the same thing, though they are in different places. Okay, so please read pharyngeal arches again and again, and it will give you a clear idea about so many things together. Thank you. Thank you for your patient listening.